Good morning. Welcome to Carmel Valley Community Chapel this Sunday morning. Glad to have you with us. I want to thank Kristen Ramson for being our liturgist and our cantor this morning. And Harriet Busick for doing our refreshments, which will be next door in Fellowship Hall after the service. I hope that you will all stay and join us for some good conversation and delicious refreshments after the service. At this point, I invite all who are able to please stand and join responsively in the call to worship printed in the bulletin.
Some beliefs are like walled gardens. They encourage exclusiveness and the feeling of being especially privileged.
Other beliefs are expansive
and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies.
Some beliefs are like shadows, clouding children's days with fears of unknown calamities. Other beliefs are like sunshine, blessing children with the warmth of happiness.
Some beliefs are divisive, separating the saved from the unsaved, friends from enemies.
Other beliefs are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Some beliefs are like blinders, shutting off the power to choose one's own direction. Other beliefs are like gateways, opening wide vistas for exploration.
Some beliefs weaken a person's selfhood. They blight the growth of resourcefulness.
Other beliefs nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth. Some beliefs are rigid, like the body of death, impotent in a changing world.
Other beliefs are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life.
Let us join together in singing our opening hymn, which is your song sheet this morning, O God, in whom all life begins.
When we gather here to
At this time in our service, I invite us all to join together in a few moments of silent meditation and prayer. After a few moments have gone by, I'll bring us back into the flow of our liturgy with a brief musical meditation. Let us join together now in silent meditation. Our reading this morning is from one of the epistles of Paul. And for an introduction, I'd like to read to you a part of the introductory commentary on the letter of 1 Corinthians from the book A New Testament, edited by Hal Tussig. Written near the beginning of what was probably an extended correspondence between Paul and Christ assemblies in the Macedonian city of Corinth, 1 Corinthians is one of the most expressive and detailed documents in the early church in its breadth of subject matter and emotion about the life of the first generation of Gentile Christ communities. The situations treated in 1 Corinthians include deciding whether to use the civil court system to settle a Christ community dispute, assessing speaking in tongues, thinking about whether an old man and a young woman should live together, evaluating the value of philosophy, wondering how important baptism is, deciding whether to be celibate or married, deciding where to shop for meat, making sense of being humiliated, trying to stand up for oneself, finding out what love means, thinking about the fate of those who die, and arguing about men's and women's places in the community and the world. Paul wrote this letter in Greek in the early 50s of the Common Era. And Paul knows many of the people in the Corinthian community and has both affectionate and combative relationships with their leaders. He is also aware that other movement leaders, such as Apollos and Peter, are influencing the Corinthian community. And he has had to delay his return to visit them. He wants the best for the Corinthians and works hard to cajole, influence, and intimidate them into his positions about how to be in community. So with that as an introduction and a context of what the whole letter is about, let's listen to this short portion of 1 Corinthians for our reading for today.
From 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 to 9. I could not speak to you as discerning people, my friends, but as people preoccupied with worldly concerns, as mere toddlers in the anointed's new way of life. I offered you milk, not solid food, because you were not ready for it. And you are not ready for it even now. You are still preoccupied with mundane interests. As long as there is rivalry and contention among you, are you not still preoccupied with mundane interests and behaving in a way that is all too common? When one of you says, I follow Paul, and another says, I follow Apollos, isn't your behavior merely common and ordinary? Who is Apollos, after all? And who is Paul? We are servants through whom you came to put your trust in God's world-transforming message, in accordance with the role God assigned to each of us. I planted, Apollos watered, but God's power is what made it grow. So neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is important. The one who plants and the one who waters have the same aim, and each will be rewarded for the work each has done. We are co-workers for God. You are God's field, God's building project. Thus endeth the reading.
in singing the hymn number 549 in the hymnal, Where Charity and Love Prevail. And let us sing the first 4 verses, and then we'll jump down and add verse 6.
Where charity and love prevail, there God is ever found. Brought here together by Christ's love, by love are we thus bound. With grateful joy and holy fear, true charity we learn. Let us with heart and mind and strength now love Christ in return. Forgive we now each other's faults as we our faults confess, and let us love each other well in Christian holiness. Let strife among us be unknown, let all contention cease. Be Christ the glory that we seek, be ours his holy peace. Love can exclude no race or creed, if honored be God's name. Our common life embraces all whose Maker is the same.
Before I get started, let me just check on the volume. Are you all able to hear me well enough? Great. How about folks over there next to the air? Okay, purifier. Great. Thank you. Paul writes to the spiritual community that he founded in Corinth and is completely candid with them, telling them that because of their rivalry and contention with one another, that they're acting like children, and that he couldn't give them solid food because they could only tolerate milk. Sounds a lot like Congress, doesn't it? So far in his letter, it appears that one of the main points of contention was a rivalry between those who followed Paul and those who followed Apollos. And rather than assert his supremacy, Paul redefines his relationship with Apollos as that of co-workers, each with their respective role to play in the community. Paul planted, Apollos watered. But it was God who made the growth possible, as Paul says. Throughout his letters, Paul employs God and Jesus, the Anointed, as the transcendent reality that unites him and Apollos and the entire community. And growing up involves turning toward a larger, more transcendent and all-encompassing reality. Just like a plant turns its leaves toward the sun to borrow Jesus as found in Matthew when he said, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow." Communities, all communities are engaged in a process of growth if they are to sustain themselves over the long haul. It is natural for communities to go through periods of turmoil, periods of decline, and periods of revival and renewal. And I do believe that right now in our day and age, the church, not just in America, but around the world, is going through a time of decline. But a time of decline can also be a time for transition, for transformation, and ultimately growth. In light of our reading from 1 Corinthians today, I'm suggesting that there is a reality, a transcendent reality, that is always bringing us together and uniting us in common cause, not just with those who think like we do, but with those who think very differently from us as well. And the world today is thinking very differently than the church of our past did. Our worldviews are vastly different from what they were a century ago. And one difference in the church, in theology, that I don't think has gotten out to the majority of members in the church in the last century, one very new thing that's been happening, a new way of thinking and doing theology, is process theology. And we've talked about that here before, I think for at least the last decade or two. Briefly, process theology views the ability and the desire to grow, to be something inherent in the nature and the fabric of life itself. All living things grow. And if God is alive, then God is growing as well. And this is a radical change from what would be considered traditional Orthodox Christian theology, which posits a view of God as unchanging. But here, in process theology, and in what I would consider to be a more contemporary Christian theology for our time, God is in flux, changing and growing right along with all of us. And this process of growth and of change and of transformation is something that we share with one another, with all living things, and with God. Now, one way in which God itself is described in the process thought of John Cobb is as creative, responsive love. Creative includes the desire and the delight for novelty, adventure, for something new. Responsive means that God pays attention to and responds to our actions and lures us to respond with a creative, responsive love as well. Another theologian and philosopher, Thomas Ord, offers a very simple and I think a very helpful definition of love. He says, quote, "To love is to act intentionally in response to others to promote overall well-being," end quote. First note that love is to act intentionally. It is not to have a feeling. Love is first and foremost something we choose to do. Second, in this definition, there is that responsive characteristic again. This acknowledges that we are all relational beings, that there is no isolated individual, not even when it comes to God. And finally, the third part of that definition emphasizes the promotion of overall well-being. This brings in a corporate, communal dimension, the perspective of social well-being, justice, equity, freedom, and shalom for all beings. It is not the promotion of well-being for a few select individuals. It is for everyone and for all living things. We are living beings that need to grow. Not only need to grow, we are made for growth. We're designed to grow and to change. But from a theological perspective, we particularly need to grow in our capacity to act intentionally in response to others, to promote overall well-being. We need to grow in love. So I want to share a story about growth with you this morning. And actually, one could use almost any story and make it about growth. But this one, I think, is particularly appropriate. It's by Dr. Rachel Naomi Raymond, and is from her book titled Kitchen Table Wisdom. And this story happened, it was an event in Raymond's life back in 1972, so it's, 50 years ago? And she was just starting out in her career in the field of medicine, and she was invited to be a subject in a research project that was being done at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, right here in Monterey County. Now, at that time, the whole humanistic potential movement was at its height, and Esalen was kind of a center of some of that thinking. People that you might know like Bateson, Maslow, Huxley, Campbell, Watts, Pearls were all a part of that in Esalen, along with many others. And this research project went for 2 years. It was an invitational fellowship that was offered to 12 established conventional physicians. Raymond writes, "We were to have the opportunity to spend a weekend a month with one another of these pioneering theorists, discussing new perspectives, experiencing new approaches, and attempting to see whether any of these new ideas about the nature and capacity of human beings had application to the practice of medicine." I mean, that sounds like growth right there. A lot of potential for growth. Raymond continues, "At the time, I was a young professor, the associate director of the pediatric clinics at Stanford, and holistic health lay a dozen years in the future. I was certain of my professional direction. I was an academic pediatrician, one of the few women on the faculty at Stanford. And my ambition was to become the new head of a department of pediatrics at a major medical school. I had joined the project not because I recognized it as the open doorway to my future, but because at 34, it struck me as a rather good way to meet men. It turned out to be one of the most important decisions of my life, a turning point toward almost everything of meaning that has followed. Despite a decade and a half of scientific training, long ago, I had been a philosophy major. many of the unanswered questions of my college days put away as secondary to the technology of my profession reemerged with all their power and mystery at Esalen. I loved these weekends. Yet about 6 months into the fellowship, I began to suffer panic attacks. After the third of these, a pattern became clear. They occurred a few days before I was to go to Esalen for the weekend. Shaken by these episodes, I went to Suki Miller and attempted to resign. But Suki was wiser than this. A master therapist familiar with the ways in which people grow and psychological phenomena that occur as the old way is lost and the new way not yet begun, she asked me if I was curious why these things were happening. I was still sufficiently attached to my objectivity that I could not readily admit that all I wanted to do was run away. When I said that I would like to understand more, she offered to help me use imagery, a basic technique of the new psychologies we were exploring in the program, to uncover the meaning of these attacks. We did a brief session. She asked me to close my eyes and encouraged me to allow an image to come to mind that related to my panic. Despite my skepticism of this new method, I found an image immediately. It was a thin, flat, white rectangle. I described this to her, and with all the authority which I was accustomed to making a rapid medical diagnosis, I added, "It's a business card." Suki asked if I was sure. With horror, I realized that I was not sure, that I didn't really know what this image was. With this realization came the beginnings of the dreaded panic feelings. I hastily opened my eyes. Suki smiled at me in a comfortable way. She sympathized with my distress and told me that I could certainly resign from the project, but it might be best if I waited until the meaning of these episodes became clear. She suggested that I reflect on my thin white rectangle several times a day, each day in my downtime, and to wonder at it while waiting at stoplights or in line at the supermarket. She encouraged me to hold it in my mind and in a steady and undemanding way to be open to knowing what it meant. She assured me that its meaning would come to me in time. It took 3 or 4 weeks during which I was frustrated and irritable, convinced that this was all Suki's clever manipulation to keep me in the research program and preserve the integrity of her data. But this was not the case. I can remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when the mystery resolved itself. I was driving up Go Street, one of the steepest hills in San Francisco, in a car with standard transmission. All of my attention was focused on shifting gears without sliding backward into the car behind me. Suddenly, the flat white rectangle reappeared in my mind's eye, but this time, it started to change shape. It started to puff up. The image was accompanied by all the chaotic feelings of a full-blown panic attack. Drenched in sweat, I pulled to the curb and parked. Terrified, I remember thinking, I'm going to die here. And then I knew what it all meant. The understanding came in the form of a story. The white rectangle was not a business card after all. It was a marshmallow that had been subjected to a steady external pressure for many, many years. The pressure had distorted its natural shape so that it was long and flat. But now this pressure had been released. Its shape was changing, and it was terrified. It felt as if it was dying. But the marshmallow was not dying. It was returning to itself. The shape that had been most familiar to it was not its own shape. With the lifting of the pressure, something deep in it could remember its integrity, its true shape, and was reclaiming it now. And somehow, there were other marshmallows that would now be able to recognize it and befriend it. With this insight, the panic was gone. And I knew a number of things with certainty. This childlike story had nothing to do with marshmallows. This was a story about me. My family had the highest regard for scholarship, academics, research, and teaching, and a significant contempt for the non-rational. My medical colleagues felt the same. I had been under a lifelong pressure to conform to this way of being in the world. It was the price of belonging. I could do these things very well and would always be able to do them, but they were not my natural way. Rather like writing with your right hand when you are a lefty. I had done them for so long and so successfully that I had not known that they were not my way, but knew it with absolute certainty now. The ideas of the Esalen program were transformational, and the people I met there were radically different from the people I had lived among for years. They were more like my grandfather, and being with them had brought his presence back into my life. The integrity of their inquiry into the ineffable, their willingness to entertain questions that were larger than the available tools of research, had begun to release the pressure that had held me in a shape that was not my own. That shape was dying, and I was changing back to a way of being that would fit me perfectly. Although I could be analytical and pragmatic, by nature, I was intuitive, even a mystic. I was my grandfather's granddaughter. I had remembered, and I was going home. And she concludes, the panic attacks never returned. Suki did not seem surprised at all. I think this is a beautiful story about one individual's growth and transformation at a seminal time in her life. A moment of growth that opened her up to what was both a new way of being in her world and also a more authentic way of being herself in the world. And I'm wondering, how might this story apply to the church today? I'm wondering what kind of pressures the church has been under to maintain a very traditional, very orthodox status quo, to resist the changing worldview, not only of the modern world, but of the postmodern world that we are part of now. I'm wondering What kind of things are stifling us and keeping us in a form that no longer fits us? What things have we outgrown? And what new horizons are beckoning us today? Beckoning us to remember something essential about our work and our identity as church, as a community, as a group of people that were created to love the world. How might we, as individuals and as a community, act intentionally in response to others to promote overall well-being? You know, there is a saying in the Talmud, it's printed in your bulletin under the meditation this morning, that goes, "Every blade of grass has its angel that bows over it and whispers, 'Grow, grow.'" But there was a blog from a rabbi that I read about this yesterday, claiming that he or she had never been able to find this in the Talmud. Acknowledging that the Talmud is huge, the closest that they were able to find is a quotation from rabbinic literature, but not in the Talmud. It's from a collection of midrash called Bereshit Rabbah. And there are two sayings in this section of the midrash. One is Ben Sirah said, "God caused herbs to spring forth from the earth. With them the physician heals the wound, and the apothecary compounds their preparation." Rabbi Shimon said, "There is not a single herb, but has a mazel in the heavens, which strikes it and says, 'Grow.'" You might recognize that word mazel from the word mazel tov. Mazel does not mean luck, as in good luck, in the time of that saying. It meant back then constellation, as in the constellation of stars in the heavens. And so back then, Mazel Tov meant something along the lines of, the stars are in your favor, the constellations are with you, something like that. And it has survived as an idiom to this day that we now say, meaning good luck. Yet maybe we still might glean from this that there is something about growth that is inherent, an inherent part of who we are and what we were born to do in life. And that is to grow. And perhaps whether we say yes to it or whether we end up going through life kicking and screaming against it, we are destined to grow and to love as creative, responsive beings in community. And I would encourage us all to start saying yes. And I neglected to say what I thought was one of the most interesting and important parts of that story is all the time Raymond spent in not knowing, in wondering, and just trying to pay attention. And it was, I believe, that long, intentional act of wondering and paying attention and getting your mind and your heart open and clear so that some message might come that made the revelation possible. And sometimes the best thing we can do to say yes to our growth and our evolution is to just do nothing but wake up, to be open and curious, and not to rush to, I know what I have to do. Thank you.
Let us say yes to our intention this morning to give as we are able, us bless the gifts. O God, through the offering of these gifts, may we become a more open people, open-minded in hearing your word and wisdom, open-hearted in healing a broken world, open-handed in heeding your call for charity and enacted love. With thanks for all good gifts, we present a portion of our substance and the whole of ourselves. Amen.
Please be seated. At this point in the service, I invite us all into a time for sharing our joys and our concerns with the community. If there's anything you'd like to share, please get my attention. I'll bring the microphone to you. And after you've shared, if there's any way in which we could respond to you with some solidarity, please let us know by saying, "Thanks be to God," and we'll repeat that, or "God hear our prayers," or "Blessed be," or however we might support you. I have one personal blessing I want to share. I had my cataract surgery on Wednesday, and I am so happy with the results, and so happy in my choice of surgeons. He did a great job, and I want to say thank you for those of you who kept me in your thoughts and prayers and sent emails and texts and phone calls. So thank you for your support, and thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. I can see again. Is there anything folks wish to share? Kristen, you've got a microphone right there.
I would just like to give thanks for my dear friend, Jeannie Feeney, who has come from Santa Cruz, and she is my team player, my co-worker in the other service that we give at the Christian community in Santa Cruz. And I'm just so thrilled that she gets to come here today and experience all of you. So please say hello to her. Thank you. Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. And welcome to you, Jeannie. Glad you're here. Is there anything else that folks wish to share? Well, let's continue to keep the Carlsons in our thoughts and prayers. Bud is recovering, and I don't believe he's home yet, but I didn't have a chance to check in with Elizabeth this week. So Bud is hoping to get home tomorrow, whatever day it is. But I think he probably has another week to go. Let's keep Bud and Elizabeth in our thoughts and our prayers during his recovery. God, hear our prayer.
Rick, we're used to hearing great sermons, but the stars aligned somehow today. I don't know if it was a third eye while you weren't using one of the ones that you have, but it was very special, and I thank you very much.
Oh.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Peter.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, thanks, Tom. If there's nothing else that folks wish to share at this point, I invite us all into a few moments of silent prayer and meditation together. After a little bit of time has gone by, I'll invite us to join in saying this new paraphrased version of the prayer of Jesus that is printed in the bulletin. Let us join together now for a few moments of silent prayer. spirit of creative, responsive love, who not only walks beside us, but grows along with us. May our lives be more open. May our minds be more curious. May our hearts be ever more compassionate as we seek to love more intentionally, creatively, and responsively, and to discover who we have always been and what we have been created to do here on earth. Hear us now as we say this new version of that ancient prayer that our brother Jesus taught us to pray, saying, Eternal Spirit, earth maker, pain bearer, life giver, source of all that is and that shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God in whom is heaven. The hallowing of your name shall echo through the universe. The way of your justice be followed by the peoples of the earth. Your heavenly will be done by all created beings. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. With the bread we need for today, feed us. In the hurts we absorb from one another, forgive us. In times of temptation and test, strengthen us. From the grip of all that is evil, free us. For you reign in the glory of the power that is love, now and forever. Amen. At this point in the service, we have announcements. I have two to make this morning, and one is, well, these are all probably the usual ones. Tuesday, we have our meditation service at 7 p.m. on Zoom, and the link will be going out to everyone on our directory, and I hope you'll join us for that. And we have a Board of Trustees meeting. Our new board meets Wednesday, at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Are there any announcements that you folks have to make this morning? Judy, hold on a minute. Let me get the mic.
Just one more reminder, please remember that we're going to make the Fellowship Hall rock on February 26th after church for a party in honor of Tom Lawson. And anyone that would like to come, please RSVP, because we have to plan how many are going to be there. And we're going to have Greg set up Fellowship Hall so it'll be all beautiful for our party. And there'll be a lot of talent there, so maybe we can encourage some kind of presentation. Anyway, please let me know, okay? And just don't forget the 26th.
Did everybody hear that? Okay, and speaking of making the place rock, 1 week from today is what? Anybody? Mardi Gras Sunday. Yes. Now get your costumes and beads ready. We're going to have Latin jazz this year. And a wonderful singer, local singer, Melinda DeRuin, will be singing. Kristen Thompson on percussion, I'll be at the piano, and it'll be great fun. So I hope that you'll join us for Mardi Gras Sunday, 1 week from today. If there are no further announcements, I invite all, I've got one more announcement. Just wanted to let you know, I chose the postlude I'm going to do this morning. Gershwin's Love is Here to Stay in honor of Valentine's Day coming up on Tuesday. So that's a little bit of the why to the what. At this point in the service, I invite us all who are able to stand and join in singing hymn number 707 in the hymnal, the Hymn of Promise.
In the bulb there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree, in cocoons a hidden promise, butterflies will soon be free. In the cold and snow of winter there's a spring that waits to be unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. There's a song in every silence, seeking word and melody. There's a dawn in every darkness, bringing hope to you and me. From the past will come the future, what it holds a mystery, unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see. In our end is our beginning, in our time, infinity. In our doubt, there is believing, in our life, eternity. In our death, a resurrection, at the last, a victory, unrevealed until its season, something God alone can see.
May you go forth this day in peace. May the Spirit of love be upon you, guiding your paths, opening your mind, bringing compassion to your heart, and keeping you ever curious on this magnificent adventure we call life. Go forth this day in peace. Amen.